especially when I see the purple one, I think about, okay, maybe there's a physical disability that the pharmacist doesn't see. But what if it instead is a mental disorder? You're then not being very compassionate to someone else's circumstance. When I think about the green one, someone might say, what's wrong with being asked if you're mixed with white? Coming from the family I come from, there's a lot wrong with that statement. My sister's darker, and when people see her, they sometimes say, oh, you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl, implying that dark-skinned girls aren't naturally beautiful based on the dominant culture and European influence in our media. Or when it comes to black hair. If your hair is curly, you're probably mixed because you can't have curly hair if you're just African, from African descent. So I do want to name that although we may not see at first the offensive nature of some of these comments, we have to check our own bias and privilege and how it relates to someone else. It would be offensive. So, natural reactions to these. Yes?
One that I responded to was that you're gay. At college, there were a lot of openly gay males, and you speak of just that era. At college, there were a lot of openly gay males, and people would be like, "Oh, this is my gay best friend," and while I'm sure that they were very good friends, framing them as this person is fine by being gay, and putting them in that frame immediately, I think that that's offensive. And I think that I know that
The average for that dating assessment or the entering
and oh yeah, I know that people the conversation brought up that is offensive, not because it's not true, because I am gay and we are good friends, but because you're putting me in this box of being this caricature of a person. And I know that a lot of people exactly you're gay, let me just talk about you as a gay person and only a gay person, not that's just one aspect of it.
And the original quote you said made me think that they were filling a quote. I have a gay best friend.
Yeah, exactly.
I have black friends. You're bringing dinner at their house once in a while.
For me, I'd say 4 out of the 5 of them almost it struck me as not microaggressive, but borderline aggressive. Because for me, microaggressions are more well-intended, and it's not really on a conscious level meant hurtful. But 4 out of the 5 of them to me are on a conscious level hurtful.
Tell me the one that isn't.
The one in orange, the you're gay, to me is not on a conscious level hurtful. Whereas yelling at something, yo Shaq, shut up, that is intentional.
Yeah.
And you're yelling that across the library.
I think it was here we talked about how jokes can sometimes be a path to one, navigating uncomfortable situations, but also taking the offensiveness out of it. So I believe the microaggression perspective would be that the intent was to be funny and not offensive.
Yeah.
So a lot of them has a questionable intent because of the impact it could have on someone. Yes.
I think the one in green about being at the bar and being approached and automatically assuming that nationality is a conversation that we need to have, I think in the first place, and being asked what you are or how do you define yourself, I think throws. I'm having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to say, but
That was the first thing you bring up?
yeah, I meet you and you're beautiful, so I asked you what you're mixed with, kind of the idea of dark skin not being beautiful, which is insane, and having somebody say that to you, and actually I think that it's a topic that has come up in a lot of culture. There's an artist, her name is Adrienne Piper, who did a whole piece about this where people would come up to her and ask her all the time when she was in between passing, and she had a card that she would hand to them and walk away that said don't bring it, you don't understand that that's offensive to people. And it's really incredible way that people can respond to that, I think.
I think in a way it's a catch-22 because I always want to acknowledge the assets of my culture and my ethnicity, and then I think if we're don't bring it up ever, or don't be comfortable with it, we're trying to force people to live a colorblind lifestyle, and that's not what we want either. So we do need to be very careful in how we approach these things.
I think when I read the purple one, for me that resonates, I got diagnosed with a bone tumor when I was 21, so when I would go to pick up my medication, for Norco, the pharmacist would sit down with my mom and I and be okay, like these drugs are super addictive and like they're not for fun, like you have too many of them. Even when I was in the hospital, like getting surgery, like they saw me as just a young woman, so they didn't want to give me like pain medication and all these other things because they were like, you're fine, you're 20, 21 at the time. And even like now, to an extent, when I go to the doctor and stuff, like, oh, like, why are you here? Like, I just had my oncology visit, and they were like, are you sure you're in the right office? Like, this is for people who have, like, had cancer or tumors. And I'm like, okay, like, I can't even go to the doctor now and just, like, be fine about it. And so for me, it's kind of like, what you were saying, like, just because you can't see a disability or just because you can't see a scar doesn't mean that it's not there.
Coming from a medical background myself, patients that like look disheveled or whatever, it was always assumed they were there for drugs, and that nothing was really wrong with them. And then when people were pretty, like eventually pretty, they would it would be assumed like, oh, there must be something wrong with their here. And even like the physician working would work them up differently, even if they came into the same complaints.
That made me think about how I perceive or have perceived homeless people in the past. Like when I think they look like they're about to go buy drugs, I don't give them money. But if I feel like they look intact, it's almost a catch-22. Why would I give them money if they're like on their way to a job interview? I've worked through that, of course, but the way someone looks can also challenge how we communicate and when we think about it.
So the red one kind of reminds me of Rush Hour, the movie where Jackie Chan comes into a African American bar, hears the N-word for the first time, and really uses it with other patrons at the bar. Kind of like that's what that might come from, the fact that maybe the white student hasn't been around that many students, like other African American students, might have used it in a. I guess that would where the microaggression might kind of come from, is the fact that they don't know the actual culture norms between students, like particularly for like for me, like if I had a friend, like for Asian people, we kind of like throw some words like that might not be appropriate for other people to say, same thing for races too. That's where I feel like that's where that might have microaggression.
And that'll come up in our role play as well.
Obviously, one thing that just happens to not be up here is stuff involving mental illness. And like I heard,
The underlying message I think for Purple, because I didn't make this quote, is that it's a
okay. What I was, yeah, I don't need to overlook that, but what I was more so speaking to was like people saying, like someone like slipping up, messing up, like like working hard, and like people like I've had people say to me before, and I guess people are just like learning new lingo, like what are you autistic? And that hits me pretty hard because I was autistic as a child. I was like really heavy on the spectrum, and I'm like really lucky to be here, and even though it's kind of like strange, like people say stuff like that, like I feel like it just slips out so much even for long time people when I kind of it's just one thing that like often goes unnoticed.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
For the blue one, I really didn't like it because with like the Newtown, Aurora, Columbine, we're looking at young white males killing mass amounts of people, and it gets attributed to mental illness. You see something with a similar amount of deaths, maybe, or even fewer in this case, in terms of the Boston thing, but it's a different race, it's a terrorist attack. It's not like this 19-year-old kid that did it had a mental illness, and those other 19-year-old kids did, because they're his skin color, he's a terrorist now.
Thank you for sharing that. That critical awareness is what we need to take into our classrooms around how it's portrayed in the media, because our students see it and we don't want them to internalize that stuff. It also makes me think about Hurricane Katrina, when they were calling people from this nation refugees, right? But from America. It's a different perspective, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, from like Hurricane Katrina situation, I remember there's a lady in one of my classes, a teacher put a media clip of a white family breaking into a store, and the news anchor was saying like, oh, how sad, like white people are having to break in, or like not, they didn't say break in, like white people are having to go into stores to get food because they can't find anything for themselves, and then at the same store they were filming a black family going in, and they're like, Black people are breaking into the stores and tearing this down apart and all this stuff. And it's all the way that it's framed that, influences like the young minds as well.
Exactly, the young minds then were seeing the images of dogs and cats being put on screens. And those were the pets of the very affluent people. They had the money to put their pets on the thing, and it was like families on top of the tops of these. Were in that but yes, this critical awareness of the world is what we're trying to take into our classrooms so that our students are aware. We're going to recap racial microaggressions. That's what we discussed week 1. Can I get 4 volunteers? 1 for the basic definition and the 3 types. Thanks.
Racial microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color.
Micro insults.
An explicit racial derogation characterized primarily by verbal or nonverbal attacks meant to hurt the intended victim through name-calling, avoidance behavior, or purposeful discriminatory action.
Micro assaults. Yes.
Microassaults, characterized by communications that convey rudeness and insensitivity and demean a person's racial heritage or identity.
Micro validation.
Characterized by communications that exclude, negate, or nullify the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person.
So keep these in mind when you see the scenarios that are going to come up, because we're going to be giving feedback to each other after the role play. But before we